Good evening. Hi, everyone. I hope. Good evening. Welcome to the online Masters and Doctoral Support Program. And this is a 2021 delivery. My name is Professor Tennyson Mokuchini. I am your facilitator for the evening. Many of you would have met me or at least listened to an earlier session that I did a couple of days ago, where we looked at the first part of developing your research topic. And basically, if you recall from the session, I did an introduction of what the key activities of research are. And if you refer to that session, you will identify that we spoke about the systematic nature of research. We spoke about the rigor that's involved in research, and we also spoke at length about the expectations of what an appropriate research focus should be, and that the focus should be on a problem worthy of attention, of course, and how you determine that attention or the fact that it is indeed a worthy problem was through, I spoke to you about magnifiers of the problem, things like showing the statistical significance of a problem, things like showing that a problem is indeed topical, showing that it has been a problem that has persevered for many years, and also being able to show that even though you are interested in the problem from a very local perspective, it is an issue that has global, national, and at some points continental relevance. So that's what the first session was. The second session, of course, continues this whole foray into the conversation about how you determine your topic and how you clarify the focus of your study. And at this point, a lot of the things we're doing tend to be almost abstract, in that we speak at a high level about the different things that you ought to take account of or pay mind to. And one of the most significant issues that comes up over and over again is that when people are developing their topics, they struggle with discerning how it is that they differentiate between a master's level piece of work, for example, from a doctoral piece of work. And it felt important that we spend a fair amount of time on this. And of course, this is of a life and death nature for people who are doing doctorates. But of course, for those who are doing a master's, it is less life and death, but it's critical nonetheless. So you know what expectations are required of you as a master's student versus what the expectations would be if you were at a doctoral level. So the session that we're having today speaks at some point, at some level, about determining doctorateness. And then I speak to you about the elements of viable research topics, the elements of viable dissertations, viable theses. And what I ask of you is that you pay very close attention to this, because at some level it allows you to become your own examiner. You become able to determine whether the piece of work that you're working with has the potential of being the master's level output that you're talking about, or the doctoral level output. So the session that I'm doing today focuses quite narrowly on that issue of differentiating between master's level work from doctoral level work. And please don't underplay the relevance of this to you, because you will be shocked at how many. Some studies have been carried out to show that anything up to 80% of studies do not actually align with the outcome expectations as far as the objectives that they meet. So you really need to understand this very, very clearly, because it allows you to then determine and make very informed decisions about how you separate your work from that of another student who's at a different level. As always with these sessions, the beginning is with me on full frontal with the video on, but I will turn this off now and share my screen. And in sharing my screen, I will be sharing a presentation that you can find online. You can find this online, and we'll share the link with you when we send out the recording. This presentation that I'm sharing with you basically walks us through this whole communication about the doctorateness of your work, or for those at master's level, determining whether you're showing the right competencies for it to be a master's piece of work. This will be the second session to top up the work that was done in my first session with you. So at the very end, you'll have the opportunity, and as we proceed, you have the opportunity to type in your questions. And just so you're aware, folks, I've had some unexpected building works and all sorts of things that disrupt electricity and so forth. And we have made some provisions to ensure that your session is not disturbed. But you never know, no matter how good your plans are, you always have to have a plan for the plan. So without taking much of your time, I will take myself off screen and then open up the presentation that we're focusing on. And I trust you will be looking at this and seeing what looks like a full screen to you. And don't worry, I look small at this point, but I will enlarge it. We have 8 or 9 slides to work through, but each of them have quite a lot of content that needs to be assimilated. And we go through it now. Right. So as I have indicated already, we're going to look at the concept of doctorateness and master's level competence. And I need to be very clear about putting this on the record, because many a time people ask questions that could be answered by a better understanding of this point of clarifying. So the first thing is we're going to clarify doctorateness. And then ordinarily we would have, if it was a smaller session, we would have an opportunity for you to brainstorm the sort of things that you understand when someone says, how do you differentiate one level of study from the other? And in the absence of that opportunity on this session, I will avail to you different options that can be looked at in terms of how you work to differentiate things. Then we will have to look at how you operationalize this concept of doctorateness within your doctoral study. And then I also offer some final thoughts and things that we should consider. So you remember that when you, all of us, when we enter the master's and doctoral world, we really are competing with ourselves, but we are competing with the rest of the world, and our provision is compared globally. So in essence, anyone who gets a master's or a doctorate in country A should be able to go and study in country B and assume those same qualifications, because there's international expectations around these things. And one of the think tanks that's associated with differentiating how we determine the expectations of postgraduate provision is the Times Higher Education Review. It's set in the UK, and they've done a review of global postgraduate provision, and in that review, they speak about certain criteria, and I want to mention these criteria because they are things that you must build them into your topic. You must build them into your focus so that when you do your work, the way that you have focused it, the way that you've identified it, the way that you have defended it, actually naturally leads it into being master's level work or doctoral level work. And you can't pitch your targeting unless you understand what the think tanks of the world are looking for when it comes to your work. So they speak of 7 very specific competencies that I want you to pay very particular mind to when you speak of your study. So the first is graduate competence. And when it comes to graduate competence, what they are asking relates to whether the problem that you have chosen, the way in which you handle it, and the way that you progress through it, whether those things demonstrate that you are a competent graduate. And of course, that graduateness and the competence of it differs at master's level as it does from doctoral level. I want you to refer back to Bloom's taxonomy that I spoke about when we did the last session. That taxonomy spoke about the levels of engagement with information or knowledge that we partake in. And one of the things that it speaks about is it speaks of the fact that the most basic level of understanding is when people can just remember something. And then as it progresses on, it talks about a much more deeper understanding of that concept. Or it speaks, as you progress up, it talks about how well you can apply certain things that you know. It talks well about your ability to analyze things. It talks about your ability to synthesize, your ability to evaluate, and of course, at the very top of that competence level is the ability to create new knowledge. So when we talk about graduate competence, and we're talking about it from the level of a master's level student, we're expecting that in your work, you should show that you have no problem describing things. We should show that you have no problem analyzing things. We should also be able to demonstrate that you have no problem synthesizing things. And of course, if we're talking about doctoral level, then you go one step higher, and that refers to your ability to evaluate along with your ability to create new and alternative knowledge. So already that criteria for assessment, the graduate competence criteria, has in it many embedded expectations for you. It clearly says that if your study has objectives that do not go as high as the analysis or the synthesis level, then it is not a master's level study. And if your objectives do not go up to evaluation and creation of new ideas, then of course your study is not a doctoral study. So that first criteria speaks a lot and directs you in terms of pitching your objectives of your study and knowing where you sit. The second competence or second criteria that they assess postgraduate outputs by is the criteria of whether you have demonstrated topicality, whether you have demonstrated the relevance of your work, whether you have shown that your work does not only, or your focus area or research question is not one that is relevant to you and your close friends, it has global relevance. So unless you can demonstrate a global angle or importance related to your topic, then you have a challenge in as far as it relates to you demonstrating your topic is viable as a study possibility. Thirdly, there is this issue of methodological congruence. Methodological congruence refers to the fact, or it speaks to the fact that you need to be so confident with the different research methodologies that when you have a problem, you can look at the problem and ask yourself, what is the best methodology to get to the bottom of this problem? And of course, the more current problem that we face is that you will often meet individuals who have a methodological preference, and then they use that preference to guide the choices they will make in their study, and that is not how it should be. Your methodology that you use should be guided by the simple determination of what method is the best fit for what I want to understand. It should not be about you saying, what method do I like? And if I like that method, I will force my study to be that. So one of the huge critiques that external reviewers of South African provision have looked at is that people are generally uncomfortable with using a wide range of methodologies, so much so that they decide to just have one methodology of preference, of choice, and they use that with every problem they meet. So it's no different from deciding that you are a mechanic, but you're very good at using a shifting spanner. And no matter what problem you reach or identify in your work as a mechanic, you will always use the shifting spanner. You and I will know that that is not tenable, it is not sustainable, and it's definitely not the way to demonstrate your overall competence. So, and this is why we have this arrangement within this program that we will teach you qualitative methods, quantitative methods, mixed methods. We'll teach you qualitative sample determination methods. We'll teach you quantitative options. We will teach you all the varied things so that you are able to look at all this repertoire of tools that you have and choose the right tool for the right problem. But if you go out and you assess the general climate when you meet people in the research world, is that they will say, hey, I'm a qualitative researcher. Everything I do, I look at with this lens. And that, of course, creates a very substantial problem. So we need to attend to that. And what we are asking of you is that when you develop your focus and you conceptualize how you will collect data, you make sure that you do this by aligning your methodology to the problem rather than forcing a problem into one preferred methodology. Then, of course, one of the areas that they look at is that they say people with access to different types of educational programs will suffer or will demonstrate limitations in the way that they're able to engage with research tasks. This, of course, does not apply to you anymore because you have made it onto a program such as this one, whose primary job is broadening your abilities, broadening your research competencies, and all those things. And once you have access to such a program, then of course that challenge that comes with being in a place where you are not catered for falls off. Secondly, the fifth consideration talks about societal impact. So when you devise a topic and you look at a potential area of focus, you need to ask yourself, what is the real life application of this thing that I'm interested in? How will life be better informed? How will life change? How would life be more deprived if I didn't do this work? And you must communicate that clearly. So if you're deciding that you want to study leaves or something like that, but you believe that your study of leaves will help us to better understand something that's critical to life, then you make it clear from the onset of your study. So one huge critique from all research, master's and doctoral level, is that they lack a very clear demonstration of how they will impact society as we know it. Then the sixth thing refers to this issue of whether you show fidelity to the expected exit competencies of your level of study. So basically, when a reader reads your works, they should not be asking themselves whether what they're reading is master's level or doctoral level. The work should speak for itself. And the place where it speaks is that it speaks through your ability to make sure that your objectives speak to the level that you are in. You make sure of all these things. And basically, when we speak to you about the different ways that you develop outcomes, and I explain to you that a doctoral study must have an outcome that involves creation, then you realize that I'm trying to set it up so that your exit competencies are met without question. If you have a doctoral study whose primary start and end is to describe a phenomena without evaluating that phenomena, without synthesizing the different positions in relation to that phenomena, then it clearly is not a doctorate. And when people ask, how do I demonstrate my work as a doctorate? Much of your demonstration comes from the type of ways that you have articulated your objectives and the types of objectives that you have and the level of Bloom's taxonomy that your objectives get to. So if your objectives do not get to that high level, then one would expect that you are studying at a much lower level. So these are the consideration. Please take note of these 6 criteria, because they are the criteria by which examiners actually assess your work. And so when you're developing your topic, you want to develop a topic that will naturally fit itself so that you don't later have a topic that doesn't sound clever enough for the level that you are aspiring for it to be acknowledged as. So that's the first thing. We are once again still talking about your topic and how you focus it, but we are now talking about the characteristics of your topic that you should try and make sure you have got. So generally people will ask things like, oh, so how do I know something is a master's level study, and how do I know that it is a doctoral level study? And the general answers people give you will be around, oh, a master's level study will be shorter, doctorate much longer. Some will say master's level is one methodology, a doctorate is mixed methods, and that type of stuff. But really the competencies are spelled out in very distinct ways. And I want you to recognize that all those things that people mention in every day about, oh, a doctorate would be longer, it would be this, they aren't the full academic truth. They do reflect in some shape or form the general patterns that you see. But if it were to be about having a definite determining differentiator, there are 3 specific differentiators which I will orientate you to now. And those differentiators are important. They speak to 3 notions of practicing. And those notions of practicing are what will make you smell out a doctoral level study from a master's level study by just reading a page or 2 of what's going on. So the first thing is that in a doctorate, the way you do things is separate, very distinct. And you're doing, remember, I spoke about the fact that everything we do is related to, is systematic, it's drawn from a system of thinking. So doctoral study will have many more systems they draw from. If I say to you, how are you approaching this thing? You'll say, I approach this thing using knowledge that I have from this area of science, or alternatively, I would use alternative B or alternative C, and so forth and so forth. And that demonstrates that when you are faced with doing something, you have a number of knowledge sources that you draw from. You don't just decide that, oh, this is how I will act. You will think, okay, there's a theory that supports me to act in this way. There's another theory that supports me to act in that way. So in the way when you do things, the level of preliminary contemplation is different at a doctoral level than it is from a master's level. Then, of course, the second differentiator is how you achieve. So when I say achievement relates to your final outcome. So the aim and the interest of a doctoral study will be much more complex. It will be much at a much higher requirement than that of a master's level piece of work. Then, of course, the final bit is to do with the level of thinking. So a master's level study, as I've said, will engage with material up to the point of analysis and possibly synthesis, but a doctoral level piece of work will do analysis, it will do synthesis, but it will proceed beyond that into considering issues around evaluation of the thing that's being looked at, and of course proposing new ways of dealing with things. So these differences are differences that are embedded in the two things. Of course, someone would ask me, if I'm a master's level study, does it mean that I shouldn't create things afresh? No, it does not mean that you shouldn't create things afresh. You can, but what it certainly means is that that expectation, if you were to achieve it, would be a surprise and a welcome distinction for you, rather than a basic requirement. But at a doctoral level, if someone fails to create new knowledge, then that failure is treated as a failing in their doctoral attempt. But if a master's level does not create new things, but manages to do synthesis, analysis, and all the lower orders of learning, then they have met the requirements of their study. So what I do with the following slides is I decipher these notions. So when it comes to acting, I'm talking about acting in a doctoral or master's way in terms of how you identify the research problem. Do you look for something very complex with multiple disciplines that are impacted? Do the outcomes that you have differ? We spoke about how the number of objectives in a master's level study will be a given number, could be anything from 3 to 5, whereas in a doctorate it would be from 5 to 8. So the way that you do things and the complexity with which you engage with things is different by virtue of the fact that you are doing a doctoral level study. Then, of course, achieving is the second notion that helps you to decipher, or at least to clarify, whether what you're doing is speaking more to a master's level expectation versus a doctoral level expectation. And that condition or concern with achieving relates to how the levels of expectations that your final outcome for your study relates to. So in a master's level, the outcome will be about you understanding something and answering questions and showing that you have mastery of research methods, you have mastery of the topic. But at doctoral level, you show all those things to do with mastery, but in addition to that, you are able to show that you can come up with your own new thesis or your own new theoretical contribution to this thing that you have been looking at. Then finally, the notion of thinking or conceptualizing is to do with the fact that your level of critique differs from one to another. When we talk about the analysis levels, you will notice that at master's level, you may be required to present 2 or 3 competing viewpoints, but at a doctoral level, you are expected to show many more competing viewpoints, and to, of course, summarize them and offer new perspectives if you're a doctoral study versus a master's level study. So as I've always said, I always believe that when you look at competencies or relate to things, your best point of departure is to look at a well-rounded definition of the thing you are interested in and use that definition to highlight some of the key expected behaviors of the thing that you are looking at. So in this case, the concept of interest is doctorateness. And with respect to a doctoral study, they say a doctoral degree shall be awarded to a candidate who, having critically investigated and evaluated an approved topic, resulting in an independent and original contribution to knowledge, and demonstrated an understanding of research methods appropriate to the chosen field, has presented and defended a thesis by oral examination to the satisfaction of examiners. If you look at this, in it, we talk about a candidate who has shown the ability to critically investigate. So you're going to ask questions behind the questions of the questions. Not only have you evaluated, then you're able to, have you investigated, you show that you're able to evaluate too. And that level of evaluation is distinct, that it belongs to a doctoral space as opposed to a master's level or honors level space. And then, of course, you demonstrate that you are very aware of the different research methods, and that you have been able to offer an independent and original contribution. So you've seen and looked at all the research, but in spite of seeing and looking at all the research and the outcomes and the best practices, you are in a position at the conclusion of a doctoral study to offer an alternative way of seeing things from what has existed before. So this again links into the fact that you would have the expectation of an exit learning outcome that talks, exit research objective that talks to you developing something. And by contrast, master's level competence relates to, it's really about you as a student demonstrating that you have mastery of the subject. So you are able to describe all the different things that relate to the subject. You are able to identify the different arguments, the positions that exist in relation to that topic. You are also able to show that you have mastery in analyzing things, and where the methods and techniques, and you're aware of all the different methods that exist. You're aware of the techniques, you're aware of the different contexts, and you can look at the different types of data that come towards you and can do so without showing any limitations. So it is in a master's level study, you are showing mastery of the fact that you understand all the tools that are in front of you to utilize. You understand how to apply them. You understand how to analyze things with the expected level of depth, and so forth. All those things are to do with showing mastery. You will notice an absence. You will notice an absence of a requirement that you make an independent and original contribution. Nothing is asked of it at master's level. So you realize now that the differences are literally buried in you taking a master's level definition and comparing it with a well thought through doctoral level definition. But essentially, when someone says what makes mine a master's, what makes yours a doctorate, it boils down to the extent to which people can go beyond just mastering the methods that are being used. They are able to critique things in ways that are much more expanded. They're able to offer new ways of thinking about stuff. They see arguments from very multiple perspectives, and all those varied possibilities. All of that relates to and speaks directly to how you separate out a PhD from a master's level piece of work. And so you will realize that ultimately this thing about people saying a master's will be shorter than a doctoral study is not entirely true. It just circumstantially happens to be true because if you critique things with greater depth, if you offer mastery of knowledge, and then you also produce new knowledge, the expectation is that you will take up more time to do that than a master's level person would. So essentially your work will be longer, but the fact that it's longer is not the reason that makes it a doctorate. It becomes a doctorate by the fact that it engages with knowledge at much more complex levels of knowledge exposure. So now I'm sharing with you some components of a doctorate, and these components of a doctorate are also components that you would expect to see at a master's level piece of work, but it's some are expectations that would be nice to have. Some are requirements that are set up requirements that should not be negotiated otherwise. But so the contribution to knowledge, that's explicit to contribution to knowledge. Both the master's and doctorate will contribute to knowledge, but one will make an original and new independent contribution rather than just a contribution. And remember, you can contribute to knowledge by either suggesting brand new knowledge or extending what is already known about a particular piece of work. So master's level studies tend to be concerned with the extension of what we know rather than production of brand new thoughts and conceptualizations and viewpoints about specific topic areas. Then, of course, the stated gap in knowledge, that is expected of as a requirement of a doctorate. At master's level, one would expect that you are choosing a topic because you believe that there's some knowledge deficit that needs to be attended to. So master's level, you demonstrate that, but it is not as such a non-negotiable requirement as it is in a doctorate. Explicit research questions, those are required in both master's and doctoral studies. Conceptual framework, please folks pay attention to this. In a doctoral study, you are expected to have a standalone chapter that talks about theoretical and conceptual frameworks, but at master's level, you may actually include conceptual framework conversations within other chapters of your study rather than having a standalone chapter that looks at this. This latter point that I've made differs from university to university, and what I always suggest to people is that look at other theses or dissertations that have been passed or evaluated as being good examples in your field, and then look at what they've done and use that as a much more reliable guide than listening to my current conclusion about what you should expect to see, because my description is based on the law of averages. I've not considered the fact that you are all in different contexts that may have in-house rules which differ in some shape or form from what I'm telling you here. All have an explicit research design. Both masters and doctorate are expected to use appropriate methodologies, so you make sure that the methodology fits the challenge or the problem you're looking at, rather than having a methodology that's static and you use no matter what it is that you're looking at. Then, of course, there's an expectation that you make sure that if you choose the appropriate methodology, you also choose data collection approaches and methods that are fitting of the scenario and the setting, and of course, the nature of research problem that you're looking at. Then, of course, the clarity and precision of your presentation and the full engagement with theory, those are global expectations that we have of educational or scholarly progression in any shape or form. Then cogent arguments and having coherent arguments throughout the piece of work, that's an expectation and one that we will teach you about, because the skill of argumentation and the skill of making your position known and explaining and all the different positions that are held, it is one that needs to be developed for each of you as students, but in any case, it's something that we will deal with. Then, of course, we talk about the fact that with every study, it should explicitly be about answering questions that relate to a problem of interest or a phenomena of interest. So that is a universal requirement, regardless of the level of study that you're in. Now, I have spoken to you about the fact that doctoral studies stand out because they are required to make original contributions. So this last slide is very specific and is specific to doctoral students in that it helps you to kind of get a much more clearer understanding of what we mean when we talk about original contribution. So we talk about originality firstly in terms of it as being the cardinal principle of doctoral research, and it is to do with the fact that when you do your work, you are seeking to do it in ways to approach spaces of knowledge that others have not reached before. So that is the originality. So we are likely to see originality in a doctorate in many components of that doctorate. We'll see it in the way that they join up pre-existing theories to understand their topic. We'll see the originality in the way they ask their research questions. We'll see originality in the way they select potential participants and informants, and so forth and so forth. And we'll also probably much more see it in their development of an original explanatory framework or model or whatever. So, and then another component that we globally refer to when we talk about originality is this component of creativity. And that relates to the capability to make, do, or become something fresh and valuable with respect to others as well as ourselves. So when I talk about creativity, you will find that at doctoral level study, people can take one data collection approach and join it up with another to show creativity, as long as they can give a rigorously considered and thoughtful and logical explanation for why this is so. So you may take the example now of us doing research within this COVID context. People may have planned to originally have face-to-face interviews only, but because of the nature of the challenges we have, they start to think of ways of half face to face, half online, half this, half that. That creativity is an essential part of what we refer to when we're asking people to make original contributions within their study. And then, of course, when we talk about innovation, there's a much higher impetus or requirement within a doctoral study for the student to take what is an abstract idea, a very academic thing, and talk about its potential application and its practical utility in one way or another. So when we talk about originality, we are asking you to really look at originality in its most basic form, to look at creativity, and to look at innovation as being central components of what we are asking for from you. So now that I've shared all these things with you about the expectations and the requirements that we have when we look for discern whether something is master's level or doctoral level. And now you should take this knowledge and use it as you develop your topic. When you look at your topic or you have a focus that you're looking at, if you are at doctorate level, you ask your questions, does this focus give me the potential to be able to do things, to think about things, to conceptualize in ways that are different from a master's level student, and so forth. But this information that I've provided in this somewhat brief session that we have today relates particularly to giving you background ways of thinking, so that when you identify your topic, you do all these things, they are at a level that is appropriate with the outcome expectation that we have of you. Of course, many of you look at this and think, oh, I thought that the professor would teach us how, how to write words together so we can formulate topics and so forth. That comes at some point during this course, but it can only make sense when we've got the basic understanding and basic clarity about the expectations of your course of study, so that you are able and you are well placed to be able to offer the piece of work or the level of engagement that we would like from you. So as I have presented the material up to this point, I will look through and welcome questions from you. Depending on whether we have been able to retain you live throughout this presentation, I may be able to answer the questions immediately. Failing which, I will look at all the typed questions that have been offered and utilize those as the basis for offering responses. And on that note, I want to thank you all for taking time to listen to the didactic lecture presentation that I've offered here. And I will now look at the questions that are presented to me. I thank you very much. And remember, many of the things that we have spoken about are principles. They are principles that will guide you when we do the practical walking through how you develop the topic, how you write it out, the choice of words. But you now have a very sound foundation of the do's and the don'ts, the ways of thinking about it, and the aspirational expectations that we have of you if you are a master's level student versus a doctoral level student. I trust that this will give you a very, very good basis for how you start and how you progress with your chosen area of interest. I thank you.